Lucy Chen wiped down another table, her back aching from the 10-hour shift that wasn't even close to ending. The crystal chandeliers of Bellini's, one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants, cast a warm glow over the white tablecloths and polished silverware. To the wealthy diners, the elegant lighting created ambiance. To Lucy, it merely highlighted the crumbs she needed to brush away before the next round of customers arrived. "Table 7 needs water," called Raj, the head waiter, as he breezed past with a tray of cocktails balanced expertly on his fingertips. Lucy nodded, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. At 22, she'd mastered the art of becoming invisible. The rich didn't see the people who served them, not really. They saw functions, not faces. And that was fine with her. It meant they didn't notice when she occasionally slipped an untouched bread roll into her apron pocket for dinner later. Tonight was especially busy. The private dining room had been booked for some tech billionaire's business meeting. The manager, Mr. Walsh, had been buzzing around all day, making sure everything was perfect. These were the kinds of clients who could make or break a restaurant with a single social media post. "Lucy, need you to take more water to the sapphire room," Mr. Walsh said, appearing suddenly beside her. He straightened his bow tie nervously. "And for heaven's sake, remember to pour from the right." "Yes, sir," she said, filling a crystal pitcher with ice water. She'd been working at Bellini's for almost 3 years now, picking up as many shifts as they'd give her. Between rent on her tiny Brooklyn apartment and her part-time college tuition, every dollar mattered. Lucy balanced the heavy water pitcher and made her way toward the private dining room. Through the partially open door, she caught a glimpse of the guests, 8 men in suits worth more than her yearly salary, laughing over appetizers. At the head of the table sat Richard Harrington, founder of Quantum Technologies and one of the richest men in America. His face was familiar from news articles and magazine covers, though in person he looked older, the silver at his temples more pronounced. She slipped into the room quietly, refilling water glasses without interrupting conversations about market shares and quarterly projections. None of the men acknowledged her presence except for a brief nod from Harrington when she refilled his glass. There was something surprisingly kind in his eyes, a rarity among the usual clientele. As Lucy was leaving, she overheard Mr. Walsh on the phone in the hallway, his voice rising with panic. "What do you mean he can't make it? The pianist is a tradition for these dinners." He paced in a small circle. "Food poisoning? Well, that's just perfect. Mr. Harrington specifically requested background music during dessert, and now you're telling me—" He spotted Lucy and lowered his voice, turning away. She continued toward the kitchen, but her mind was racing. The restaurant's baby grand piano sat in the corner of the sapphire room, mostly for show. Few people ever played it. Lucy hesitated outside the kitchen doors. She could solve this problem, but it would mean making herself visible, drawing attention, breaking the cardinal rule of service work. "Mr. Walsh?" she said, approaching him after he hung up. He rubbed his forehead. "Not now, Lucy, we have a situation. I heard. About the pianist." She took a deep breath. "I could fill in. If you need someone." His eyes narrowed with suspicion. "You play piano? Professionally?" "I used to," she said, the words feeling strange in her mouth after so long. "I was classically trained." Mr. Walsh looked at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Why are you waiting tables if you can play piano?" Lucy just gave him a tired smile. Life rarely went according to plan. Her mother's medical bills had seen to that. "How good are you exactly?" he asked. "Good enough," she answered simply. Mr. Walsh checked his watch. "Dessert is in 20 minutes. Can you put together something appropriate?" Lucy nodded, her heart suddenly pounding. She hadn't performed in front of anyone in years. "Fine," he said. "But if this goes badly, you're on dish duty for a month. Go clean up and be ready." Lucy rushed to the employee bathroom, splashing water on her face and trying to steady her nerves. She stared at her reflection, dark circles under her eyes, hair hastily tied back, the standard black uniform that rendered her anonymous. For a moment she saw her mother's face overlaid with her own. "Music is a gift," her mother used to say. "When you play, you give that gift to others." When was the last time she'd given that gift to anyone? Or to herself? 15 minutes later, Lucy sat at the piano bench, adjusting it to the right height. The wealthy diners barely glanced her way, assuming she was just another hired performer. She flexed her fingers, surprised by how nervous she felt. 3 years ago, she would have laughed at the idea of getting stage fright in front of 8 distracted businessmen. But as her fingers touched the keys, the world around her faded away. She began with Debussy's Clair de Lune, the notes flowing from some muscle memory she'd thought long forgotten. The piano was perfectly tuned, its tone rich and resonant in the wood-paneled room. As she played, conversations gradually quieted. By the time she transitioned into Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major, the room had fallen completely silent. Lucy closed her eyes, letting herself get lost in the music. She'd forgotten this feeling, how playing felt like flying and drowning at the same time, how the music could pull emotions from some hidden place inside her. Before she knew it, tears were welling behind her eyelids, but she didn't stop playing. She moved from Chopin to a piece her mother had taught her, something hauntingly beautiful that had never been published. When she finally opened her eyes, she realized everyone was watching her. The waitstaff had paused in serving dessert, standing motionless at the edges of the room. The businessmen had set down their forks, and Richard Harrington was staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shock, perhaps, or recognition. The last note hung in the air. Then applause broke the silence, startling her. "That was extraordinary," said one of the men at the table. "Where did you study?" asked another. Lucy felt her cheeks flush. I should get back to work," she stammered, rising from the bench. "Please." Harrington spoke for the first time, his voice quieter than she'd expected. "Would you play one more?" Something in his tone made it impossible to refuse. Lucy sat back down, considering what to play. She settled on Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, letting the familiar melancholy of the piece wash over her. As she played, she noticed Harrington watching her hands with an intensity that was almost unnerving. When she finished, he approached the piano while the others returned to their conversations. "You play beautifully," he said. "That last piece before the Beethoven, what was it?" "I don't recognize it." "Something my mother composed," Lucy replied, surprised by her own honesty. "She taught me to play." "Your mother is a composer?" he asked. "Was," Lucy corrected, looking down at the keys. "She passed away a few years ago." "I'm sorry to hear that." His voice held genuine sympathy. "Your playing reminds me of someone I used to know. There's something in your style." Lucy stood, suddenly uncomfortable with the attention. "I should really get back to my tables, sir." "Of course," he said, but he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. "If you ever consider pursuing music professionally, I'd like to help. I sponsor several artists and musicians." Lucy accepted the card reflexively, though she knew nothing would come of it. Rich people often made empty gestures when momentarily moved by something. "Thank you, sir," she said, tucking the card into her apron pocket alongside the bread roll. As she walked back toward the kitchen, she heard Mr. Walsh singing her praises to the other staff. For the rest of her shift, customers and co-workers alike looked at her differently, with curiosity, with respect, with questions in their eyes. Lucy worked until midnight, serving coffee and clearing plates, her feet aching and her mind replaying those moments at the piano. On the subway ride home, she fished out Harrington's business card. The heavy cardstock felt out of place between her calloused fingers. Richard Harrington, Quantum Technologies. It read in simple black text with a phone number embossed beneath. She nearly tossed it into the trash at her subway stop, but hesitated. Instead, she slipped it into her wallet behind her student ID. Not because she believed anything would come of it, but because for the first time in years, someone had seen her, really seen her, through her music. Her tiny apartment was cold when she returned, the radiator making more noise than heat. Lucy kicked off her shoes and collapsed onto her bed without bothering to change. Tomorrow would bring another double shift, more invisible hours of carrying plates and filling glasses. But tonight, for just a few minutes, she had remembered who she used to be. And somewhere across the city, a man who had heard her play was remembering someone too. 3 days passed before Lucy looked at Richard Harrington's business card again. She'd been too busy with back-to-back shifts and a term paper for her business management class. But on Thursday morning, as rain pounded against her apartment windows, she found herself turning the heavy cardstock over in her hands, wondering. Her phone buzzed with a text from her roommate Zoe. "You're famous. Check your email." Lucy frowned, opening her rarely checked email account. There, among credit card offers and university announcements, was a message from Mr. Walsh. Call me ASAP about Mr. Harrington. Her stomach dropped. Had she done something wrong at the dinner? Was she about to lose her job? With shaking hands, she dialed the restaurant. Lucy! Finally! Mr. Walsh sounded unusually excited. Mr. Harrington has been trying to reach you. He wants to hire you to play at his home this Saturday. Private event, very exclusive. He's offering $5,000 for 2 hours. Lucy nearly dropped the phone. $5,000? That's more than I make in 2 months. That's what I said. He must have really liked your playing. Mr. Walsh paused. You're not planning to quit on me, are you? No, Lucy said quickly, though the thought had flashed through her mind. I'll do it, but I'll need Saturday off. Already handled. His assistant will email you the details, and Lucy, this could be big for you. After hanging up, Lucy sat on the edge of her bed staring at the cracked ceiling. $5,000 would cover her tuition for next semester with money left over. It seemed too good to be true. By Saturday evening, Lucy stood outside a towering apartment building on Central Park West, feeling completely out of place. She'd spent her last bit of savings on a simple black dress from a thrift store, hoping it looked professional enough. Miss Chen? A doorman approached. Mr. Harrington is expecting you. The private elevator opened directly into a penthouse apartment that was larger than her entire apartment building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a stunning view of Central Park, now turning golden in the evening light. In the center of the main room stood a magnificent grand piano, not the kind found in restaurants, but the kind found in concert halls. Lucy, thank you for coming. She turned to find Richard Harrington entering the room. In casual clothes, dark jeans, and a simple button-down shirt, he looked less intimidating than he had in his business suit. Your home is beautiful, she said, because she couldn't think of anything else to say. Thank you. He gestured to the piano. Would you like to try it? It's a Steinway Model D, one of the finest ever made. Lucy approached the instrument cautiously, as if it might disappear if she moved too quickly. She ran her fingers over the keys without pressing them. I've never played on anything like this. Please, he said, pulling out the bench for her. Lucy sat down, adjusting her posture from memory of lessons long ago. When she began to play, a simple Bach prelude to warm up, the sound that emerged was so rich, so perfectly balanced that tears sprang to her eyes. She'd forgotten what a truly great piano could sound like. Richard stood silently by the windows, watching her with that same intense expression he'd had at the restaurant. When she finished the prelude, he asked, Where did you study? Lucy's hands stilled on the keys. I didn't, not formally. My mother taught me from the time I could reach the keys. She was the one who studied, at the Beijing Conservatory, then Juilliard. Your mother, Richard said, moving closer. What was her name? Meilin Chen. Lucy watched as something flickered across his face. Did you know her? Richard shook his head. No, I don't think so. But I knew many musicians during that time. He sat in an armchair near the piano. You said at the restaurant that she composed. The piece you played, it was beautiful. Lucy nodded. She wrote dozens of pieces but never published them. After she got sick, she couldn't play anymore. The arthritis in her hands. She trailed off, realizing she was sharing too much with a stranger. I'm sorry, Richard said. When did she pass away? 3 years ago, cancer. Lucy straightened her shoulders. Mr. Harrington, your assistant mentioned guests arriving at 8. Should I prepare something specific? There are no guests, he said quietly. I wanted to speak with you privately. Lucy's hand moved instinctively toward her phone. Was this some kind of trap? Richard seemed to read her thoughts. My door is unlocked. You can leave any time. I just wanted to make you an offer without an audience. What kind of offer? Her voice had a brittle edge. I'd like to sponsor your musical education. A full scholarship to Juilliard, living expenses, a proper piano to practice on. Lucy stared at him. Why would you do that for a waitress you met once? Because talent like yours shouldn't be lost to the world, he said. And because I've spent my life building things, making money, acquiring power, but I've created nothing as beautiful as what you did with that piano at Bellini's. I'm a stranger to you, Lucy said flatly. What do you really want? Richard looked surprised, then smiled ruefully. You're right to be suspicious. In my world, people rarely do things without expecting something in return. He walked to the windows, looking out at the darkening park. My wife, my ex-wife, was a concert pianist. Hearing you play? It brought back memories. So this is about her? No, he said, turning back to face her. This is about you. about recognizing something extraordinary and wanting to nurture it. The world has enough tech billionaires, Lucy. It needs more music. Lucy's fingers unconsciously played silent patterns on her lap. Juilliard had been her dream once before her mother got sick, before the medical bills piled up. I have conditions, Richard continued. You audition properly. You commit fully to your studies. This isn't charity. It's an investment in your talent. And what do you get out of this investment? Lucy asked. The satisfaction of seeing what becomes of it. Maybe someday. Tickets to your first concert at Carnegie Hall. There was an earnestness in his eyes that seemed genuine. I need time to think about it, Lucy said. Of course. Richard handed her an envelope. Your payment for tonight as agreed. My offer stands regardless of your decision. Lucy accepted the envelope, trying not to think about how much money was inside. May I play a bit more before I go? On this piano? Please, Richard said, settling back into his chair. I'd like that very much. For the next hour, Lucy lost herself in the music, playing pieces she'd nearly forgotten she knew. Each time she finished one, Richard would request another. Sometimes mentioning a composer, sometimes just a feeling, something hopeful, or something that feels like rain. When Lucy finally rose from the bench, her fingers aching pleasantly, she found Richard wiping tears from his eyes. That piece, he said. The last one. Your mother wrote that? Lucy nodded. It was her favorite. She called it Daughter of Spring. A strange expression crossed his face. It's extraordinary. As Lucy gathered her things to leave, Richard spoke again. Would you bring her compositions next time? I'd like to see them. I never said there would be a next time, Lucy pointed out. No, Richard agreed with a small smile. But you haven't said no to my offer either. On the subway ride home, clutching the envelope with more money than she'd ever held at once, Lucy tried to make sense of the evening. Why would one of the richest men in America take such an interest in her? Was it really just about the music? Or was there something he wasn't telling her? The next morning, Lucy called her mother's old friend, Dr. Fang, who had been like an aunt to her growing up. Juilliard? Dr. Fang exclaimed when Lucy explained Richard's offer. Maylin would be overjoyed. But who is this man? Why is he helping you? That's what I'm trying to figure out, Lucy said. He says he didn't know Mom, but something feels off. He got emotional when I played her music. Perhaps he simply recognizes talent, Dr. Fang suggested. But be careful, little one. The very wealthy often believe everything has a price. After hanging up, Lucy opened her mother's old music box where she kept her most precious possessions. A jade pendant, old photographs, and her mother's handwritten compositions. Among the photos was one Lucy had looked at hundreds of times, her mother at 18, standing outside Juilliard with a group of other students, her face bright with possibility. Lucy studied the faded image closely. In the background, partially cut off at the edge of the photo, was a young man with his arm around her mother. Though only half his face was visible, something about his profile seemed hauntingly familiar. Lucy's heart raced as she dug through more photos. There, a clearer shot, her mother laughing at a piano, the same young man beside her, looking at her with undisguised adoration. Though decades younger, the resemblance was unmistakable. Richard Harrington. Lucy sank onto her bed, mind spinning. He had known her mother, well enough to be photographed with her, to be looking at her like that. Why would he lie? And what did it mean for his sudden interest in Lucy's musical career? Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Richard Harrington. I've arranged an audition at Juilliard next Friday if you're interested. No pressure. Just an opportunity. Lucy stared at her phone, then back at the photograph. The young man's eyes, Richard's eyes, seemed to stare back at her across time, holding secrets she was only beginning to uncover. Lucy stared at the photograph for hours that night, tracing her finger over her mother's smiling face and the young man beside her. The resemblance to Richard Harrington was undeniable. The same eyes, the same sharp jawline, even the way he tilted his head slightly when he smiled. Why would he lie? She whispered to the empty room. What aren't you telling me, Mom? The next morning, Lucy called in sick to the restaurant for the first time in 3 years. She spent the day digging through her mother's belongings, old journals, letters, anything that might explain the connection. In a weathered shoebox at the back of her closet, she found a small diary with a broken lock. Most entries were in Chinese, which Lucy could read but slowly. They detailed her mother's first years in America, her struggles at Juilliard, and then, Lucy's heart skipped, mentions of a boy named Rich. Rich took me to the symphony tonight. One entry read, "He understands music the way I do, feels it in his soul. His family doesn't approve of his interest in a scholarship student from China, but he doesn't seem to care." Later entries grew more intimate, describing a whirlwind romance, weekend trips to the beach, dreams of building a life together. Then came an entry that made Lucy's hands shake. "I haven't told Rich about the baby. His company is taking off and his parents have threatened to cut him off completely if he stays with me. A child would ruin everything he's worked for. I've decided to return to China. It's better this way. He'll forget me in time." Lucy set the diary down, her vision blurring with tears. Could it be true? Was Richard Harrington her father? The father she'd grown up believing had abandoned them before she was born? The man her mother had described as a brief mistake from her past? The next entry was dated 2 years later. "We've returned to New York, my parents are gone, and I have nowhere else to go. Rich is in the newspapers now, his company is worth millions. I saw him from across the street today. He didn't see me." Lucy has his eyes. Lucy closed the diary, overwhelmed. Fragments of memory flashed through her mind. Her mother's refusal to discuss her father, the way she'd tear up when certain classical pieces played on the radio, her insistence that Lucy use her Chinese surname rather than whatever her father's had been. With trembling fingers, Lucy typed a message to Richard. "We need to talk. I know you knew my mother." His reply came almost instantly. "Yes, can you come over?" An hour later, Lucy stood in Richard's penthouse again, this time clutching her mother's diary and the old photographs. Richard looked tired, as if he hadn't slept. "I found these," Lucy said without preamble, laying the photographs on the coffee table. Richard picked them up carefully like they might turn to dust in his hands. "Where did you get these?" "They were my mother's." Lucy watched his face closely. "You lied to me. You said you didn't know her." Richard set the photos down and rubbed his face. "I wasn't sure at first. Chen is a common name. But when you played her composition..." He gestured helplessly. "I knew." It was like hearing her again. "Why didn't you just tell me the truth?" Lucy demanded. "Because the truth is complicated," Richard said quietly, "and I wasn't sure how much you knew." "I know my mother loved you," Lucy said, her voice catching. "I know she left without telling you she was pregnant. I know she came back to New York when I was 2 and you never knew we were here." Richard looked stunned. "She came back when?" 1998. "I grew up here just a few miles from your office towers and penthouses." Lucy couldn't keep the bitterness from her voice. "She worked 3 jobs to put me through piano lessons while you became a billionaire." "Lucy," Richard said, his voice breaking, "I need you to understand something. I searched for your mother for years after she disappeared. Her roommate said she'd returned to Beijing. I called every conservatory there. I hired investigators. Eventually, I had to accept she didn't want to be found. You expect me to believe that? It's the truth." Richard walked to a bookshelf and pulled out a thick folder. "These are the investigator reports. Your mother was very good at staying hidden." Lucy flipped through pages of documents, photographs, dead-end leads, reports spanning years, the last dated 2001, 3 years after she and her mother had returned to New York. "She never told me any of this," Lucy whispered. Richard sat across from her. "Lucy, I need to ask you something important. When were you born?" "January 15th, 1996. Richard closed his eyes, calculating. 9 months after your mother disappeared." He looked directly at Lucy, his gaze intense. "Do you think I'm your father?" The question hung in the air between them. Lucy had come here certain of the answer, but now doubt crept in. "My mother's diary suggests you are. Would you be willing to take a DNA test?" "To know for certain?" Lucy nodded slowly. "I want to know the truth." "So do I," Richard said. "More than anything." 3 days later, Lucy stood outside Juilliard's imposing entrance, the same spot where her mother had been photographed with Richard nearly 30 years earlier. Despite everything, she'd decided to go through with the audition. Whatever happened with Richard, this was something she needed to do for herself and for her mother. The audition room was intimidating, a small concert hall with 5 stern-faced judges seated at a table. Lucy had practiced for hours on the old upright piano at her community college, but nothing could prepare her for the nerves now gripping her. "Whenever you're ready, Miss Chen," said the head judge, a gray-haired woman with piercing eyes. Lucy took a deep breath and began with Bach's Prelude in C minor, something controlled to steady her nerves. As she played, she felt her mother's presence guiding her fingers across the keys. For her second piece, she chose one of her mother's compositions, the haunting melody that had first caught Richard's attention. When she finished, there was silence. Then the head judge spoke. "Miss Chen, that second piece was extraordinary. Is it published?" "No," Lucy replied. "My mother composed it." "Your mother was Mei Lin Chen?" another judge asked, leaning forward with sudden interest. Lucy nodded, surprised. "She was a legend here," the judge explained. "One of the most promising talents of her year. Everyone was devastated when she left suddenly. We all thought she'd return." "She did," Lucy said softly. "Just not to Juilliard." After the audition, Lucy found Richard waiting outside. "How did it go?" he asked. "Good, I think. They knew my mother," Richard nodded. "She was brilliant. Everyone who heard her play knew she was special." He hesitated. "I have something for you." He handed her a small USB drive. "These are recordings of your mother playing at Juilliard. Student recitals. I had them digitized years ago, thinking someday I might find her." Lucy clutched the drive tightly. "Thank you." They walked silently through the crowded New York streets, each lost in thought. "The DNA results should be ready tomorrow," Richard finally said. "What happens if—" Lucy couldn't finish the question. "If I'm your father?" Richard stopped walking. "Then I've missed 22 years of your life, and nothing I can do will ever make up for that. But I'd like to try if you'll let me. And if you're not, then I'll still support your education. No strings attached. Your talent deserves that much." That night, Lucy sat at her tiny desk watching recordings of her mother on her laptop. The videos showed a young woman, barely older than Lucy was now, playing with a fire and passion that took her breath away. Between pieces, she'd smile shyly at the camera, at whoever was recording her. At Richard in one video, after finishing a particularly difficult Rachmaninoff piece, young Mei Lin looked directly at the camera and said, "For you, my love. Always for you." Lucy wiped away tears. Her mother had never stopped loving him, she realized. Even years later, when she'd tell Lucy stories about the great concert halls of the world, there had been a wistfulness in her voice, a pain Lucy now understood. Her phone buzzed with a text from Richard. "Results are in. Would you like me to come to you?" Lucy stared at the message, her heart pounding. After 22 years, she was about to learn the truth about her father. She thought of her mother, who had kept this secret until the end. Had she been trying to protect Lucy or Richard or herself? "Perhaps all three. I'll come to you," she typed back. Whatever the results showed, Lucy knew her life would never be the same again. The elevator ride up to Richard's penthouse felt endless. Lucy clutched her mother's jade pendant for comfort, running her thumb over the smooth stone as the floors ticked by. 22 years of wondering, of creating stories in her head about who her father might be, were about to end. When the doors opened, Richard was waiting. His face gave nothing away. "Come in," he said quietly. "Would you like some tea?" "No." Lucy stepped into the apartment. "I just want to know." Richard nodded, leading her to the living room where an envelope sat on the coffee table. "I haven't opened it yet." "I thought we should do it together." Lucy stared at the envelope. Such a small thing to contain something so life-changing. "You do it," she said finally. "I can't." With steady hands that betrayed years of business negotiations, Richard opened the envelope and unfolded the paper inside. He read silently, his expression shifting subtly. Then he looked up at Lucy, his eyes filling with tears. "The probability of paternity is 99.99998%, he said, voice barely above a whisper. "I am your father." The world seemed to tilt beneath Lucy's feet. Even though she'd suspected it, having confirmation was overwhelming. She sank onto the couch, trying to process what this meant. "All this time," she managed. "You were here just across the city." "If I had known." Richard sat beside her, careful to keep some distance. "Lucy, you have to believe me. If I had known about you, nothing would have kept me away." Lucy looked at him, really looked at him, seeing herself in his features. The shape of his eyes, the curve of his jaw, the way his hands moved when he spoke. How had she not seen it immediately? My mother's diary, Lucy said, gathering her thoughts. She wrote that she left to protect your future. Your family didn't approve of her. Your company was just starting. My parents were difficult, Richard admitted. But I would have chosen her, chosen you both if she'd given me the chance. Why didn't she tell you when we came back to New York? Richard shook his head. By then I was in the newspapers. Quantum Technologies had gone public. Maybe she thought I'd changed, that I wouldn't want a family disrupting my success. His voice cracked. She was wrong. They sat in silence, the weight of lost years between them. What happens now? Lucy finally asked. That's up to you, Richard said. I'd like to be part of your life if you'll allow it. But I understand if you need time. Lucy nodded, feeling strangely numb. I think I do need time. This is a lot to take in. Of course, Richard hesitated. There's something else we should discuss. Legally, as my daughter, you're entitled to— I don't want your money, Lucy interrupted sharply. I understand. But the Juilliard scholarship is still yours, regardless of our relationship. Your talent earned that. Thank you, Lucy said, standing abruptly. I should go. Lucy, Richard called as she reached the elevator. For what it's worth, I would have loved you from the very first moment. Just like I loved your mother. The words followed her all the way home. For the next 2 weeks, Lucy threw herself into preparation for Juilliard. She'd been accepted with glowing praise from the judges. Classes would start in the fall, but she had summer workshops to attend first. Richard kept his distance, sending only occasional texts to check in, never pushing. At work, Lucy gave her notice. After her final shift, Mr. Walsh hugged her tightly. Your mother would be so proud, he said. We all are. I'll still come visit, Lucy promised. You gave me a chance when no one else would. Just remember us little people when you're playing Carnegie Hall, he joked. But his eyes were misty. On a rainy Tuesday morning, Lucy found herself outside Richard's office building in Midtown. She hadn't planned to come, but somehow her feet had carried her there. The security guard looked skeptical when she asked to see Richard Harrington until she gave her name. Miss Chen, Mr. Harrington said you might visit someday. Go right up. Richard's office occupied the entire top floor, with views stretching across the city. He was in a meeting when his assistant showed Lucy in, but the moment he saw her, he excused himself and came to her. Lucy, is everything okay? I found more of Mom's journals, she said without preamble. She was going to tell you about me. She came to your office building in 2000, but lost her nerve when she saw you with your new wife on the news that morning. Richard closed his eyes briefly. Diane, we were only married for 3 years. Mom wrote that she wanted me to have opportunities she couldn't give me, but she was afraid of disrupting your life. Lucy pulled a worn journal from her bag. There's more. Letters she wrote to you but never sent. She never stopped loving you, even at the end. Richard took the journal with reverent hands. May I? Lucy nodded. That's why I brought it. She paused. I also found these. She placed a stack of compositions on his desk. All her unpublished works. Dozens of them. Some are unfinished. Thank you, Richard said, voice thick with emotion. This means everything to me. I've been thinking, Lucy continued, about what you said, about being part of each other's lives. I'd like to try if the offer still stands. Richard's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds. Nothing would make me happier. But I have conditions, Lucy added quickly. I want to make my own way at Juilliard. No special treatment, no pulling strings, and I'll accept the scholarship and living expenses, but nothing more. Agreed, Richard said without hesitation. And one more thing. Lucy met his gaze steadily. I want to publish Mom's music, all of it. The world should hear what she created. Yes, Richard said, eyes brightening with purpose. We'll do it together. I have connections in the classical music world. We can establish a foundation in her name. For the first time since discovering the truth, Lucy felt a spark of excitement about the future. I'd like that. The next day, they met with a music publisher who was initially skeptical until Lucy played one of her mother's pieces. By the end, he was offering a contract to publish the complete works of Meilin Chen. There's something else, Richard said as they left the meeting. I'd like you to meet someone. My mother, your grandmother. She's in her 80s now, and I've told her about you. Lucy tensed. The woman who didn't approve of my mother? People change, Richard said gently. She's not the same person she was 30 years ago. When I told her about you, she cried and asked if she could meet her granddaughter before she dies. I'll think about it, Lucy promised. As summer progressed, Lucy slowly allowed Richard into her life. They met for dinner once a week. He attended her workshops at Juilliard, sitting quietly in the back. She visited his office and learned about the company he had built. Little by little, they pieced together the missing years, filling in gaps in each other's stories. One evening, as they walked through Central Park, Richard asked, "Would you consider taking my last name?" "You don't have to, of course. I just thought—" "I can't," Lucy interrupted. "Mom gave me her name. It connects me to her, to my Chinese heritage. I can't give that up." Richard nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. I shouldn't have asked." "But," Lucy added carefully, "maybe I could add it. Lucy Chen Harrington has a nice ring to it." The smile that lit Richard's face was worth everything. At home that night, Lucy sat at the keyboard Richard had given her, a professional one that fit in her small apartment, and began to play. The melody started as her mother's, one of the compositions they were preparing to publish, but gradually shifted into something new. Lucy's own voice emerging from her mother's foundation, creating something that belonged to them both. As her fingers danced across the keys, Lucy felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. There were still challenges ahead. Meeting her grandmother, navigating her new identity, balancing her studies with the growing public interest in Mei Lin Chen's newly discovered works. But for the first time, she wasn't facing them alone. The melody built to a crescendo, bright and hopeful. Lucy closed her eyes, imagining her mother watching, Richard listening, the future unfolding note by note. 1 year later, Lucy sat in the green room of Carnegie Hall, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her hair was pulled back elegantly, and she wore a simple black dress with her mother's jade pendant. Outside, a full house waited for the world premiere of the Mei Lin Chen collection, Lost Works of a Forgotten Genius. A soft knock at the door broke her concentration. Richard entered, looking distinguished in a tuxedo. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Terrified," Lucy admitted. "What if I can't do her music justice?" Richard placed his hands on her shoulders. "Your mother lived in you, Lucy. Every note you play carries her spirit. You've been preparing for this moment your whole life." Over the past year, everything had changed. The publication of Mei Lin's first compositions had created a sensation in the classical music world. Critics called her work revolutionary and criminally overlooked. Piano students around the world were now studying pieces that had once sat in Lucy's small apartment. Unplayed for years, Lucy's life had transformed too. She'd moved into a modest apartment near Juilliard, where she thrived under the guidance of professors who had once taught her mother. Richard had kept his promise, allowing her to make her own way without interference, though he attended every recital, sitting quietly in the back. Their relationship had grown slowly, built on weekly dinners and long conversations about everything from music theory to childhood memories. Lucy had learned that Richard played piano too, not with her mother's genius or her own trained skill, but with genuine love for the instrument. 5 minutes? "Miss Chen Harrington," called the stage manager. Lucy took a deep breath. "Is she here?" Richard nodded. Front row center. She wouldn't miss it. She was Eleanor Harrington, Richard's mother and Lucy's grandmother. Their first meeting 3 months ago had been tense. Eleanor, a frail woman with sharp eyes and impeccable posture, had studied Lucy with undisguised curiosity. "You have your mother's face," Eleanor had said finally. But Richard's hands, piano hands. Lucy had been prepared to dislike this woman who had once discouraged her parents' relationship, but Eleanor had surprised her with unexpected honesty. "I was wrong about your mother," she'd admitted. Pride and Prejudice, not just in Jane Austen novels, it seems. By the time I realized my mistake, she was gone and Richard was heartbroken. Her eyes had filled with tears. "I've carried that regret for 30 years. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope for a chance to know my granddaughter." Since then, Eleanor had become an unexpected ally, sharing stories of Richard's youth and listening with genuine interest to Lucy's accounts of her mother. Tonight would be the first time Eleanor would hear Mei Lin's music performed publicly. A moment of atonement, perhaps. "It's time," Richard said gently. Lucy nodded, rising from her chair. "I'm ready." The walk to the stage was a blur. The spotlight blinded her momentarily as applause washed over her. Lucy bowed, then settled at the gleaming Steinway. In the front row, she could see Eleanor's white hair and Richard's encouraging smile. Lucy closed her eyes, centering herself. Then she began to play. The first piece was Daughter of Spring, the composition that had caught Richard's attention at Bellini's that fateful night. As Lucy's fingers moved across the keys, she felt her nervousness melt away. This was her mother's voice speaking through time. Lucy was just the messenger. For the next hour, Lucy guided the audience through her mother's musical journey, from playful early works composed during Mei Lin's student days to more complex pieces written during her illness, when she could no longer play herself but could still hear the music in her mind. For the finale, Lucy paused, looking out at the audience. "The last piece I'll play tonight wasn't written by my mother," she said, her voice steady in the microphone. "It's my own composition, inspired by her work and dedicated to both my parents, my mother, Mei Lin Chen, who gave me music, and my father, Richard Harrington, who helped me find it again." She hadn't told Richard about this piece. As she began to play, she watched his expression change from surprise to wonder. The melody wove together themes from Mei Lin's works with new elements that were uniquely Lucy's, a musical conversation between generations, between past and present. When the final note faded, there was a moment of perfect silence. Then the audience erupted in a standing ovation. Lucy stood and bowed, tears streaming down her face. In the front row, Richard and Eleanor stood side by side, applauding with everyone else, their faces shining with pride. Backstage after the performance, the green room filled with flowers and well-wishers. Music critics, Juilliard professors, fellow students, all wanted to congratulate the new star of classical music. Lucy accepted their praise graciously, but her eyes kept searching for Richard. She found him in a quiet corner, speaking with an elderly Chinese man who looked vaguely familiar. "Lucy," Richard called, waving her over. "There's someone you should meet. This is Professor Wu from the Beijing Conservatory. He was your mother's first piano teacher." The old man bowed slightly. "Miss Chen Harrington, your mother would be very proud tonight. You play with her fire, but your own voice shines through." "Thank you," Lucy said, deeply touched. "You came all this way for the concert?" "Your father arranged it," Professor Wu said with a smile. "He's been tracking down everyone who knew your mother, collecting stories and memories." Lucy looked at Richard questioningly. "I wanted to give you something more than just my own memories," Richard explained. "So I've been finding people who knew your mother at different points in her life. Professor Wu has hours of stories about her childhood in Beijing. And," he gestured across the room where several older musicians were chatting with Eleanor, "those are former classmates from Juilliard." Lucy was overwhelmed. "You did all this for me?" "For both of you," Richard said softly. "For the daughter I just found and the woman I never stopped loving." Later that night, after the celebrations had ended, Lucy and Richard walked through the quiet streets of New York. It was almost midnight, but the city hummed with its usual energy. "I have something for you," Richard said, stopping under a streetlight. He handed her a small wrapped package. Lucy opened it to find a delicate silver music box. When she turned the key, it played a familiar melody, her mother's Daughter of Spring. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Open the lid," Richard urged. Inside was a folded note in her mother's handwriting. Lucy opened it with trembling fingers and read, "To my dearest Lucy, on your first performance at Carnegie Hall. I've always known this day would come. Play with your heart always. Love, Mom." Lucy looked up in confusion. "How?" "Your mother wrote it before she died," Richard explained. "Dr. Fang gave it to me. Apparently your mother left several letters for important moments in your life. Graduation, wedding, first major performance. She believed in you even then." Lucy clutched the music box to her chest, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "She knew I'd make it here someday." "She did," Richard agreed. "And somewhere she's listening." 3 days later, Lucy stood in a small recording studio preparing to record Mei Lin's complete works. The Mei Lin Chen Foundation, established by Richard, would use the proceeds to fund scholarships for young musicians from disadvantaged backgrounds. As Lucy settled at the piano, she felt a profound sense of rightness. 1 year ago, she'd been a waitress struggling to pay rent, her mother's music hidden away in a box, her father a stranger. Now, her mother's legacy would live on through her playing, reaching audiences her mother had never dreamed of. Richard watched from the control room, giving her a thumbs up. Beside him sat Eleanor, her once stern face now softened with genuine interest. On the music stand sat a photograph of Mei Lin at Lucy's age, a reminder of where it all began. Lucy placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The music flowed through her, her mother's gift, her father's support, her own voice emerging stronger every day. As the melody filled the room, Lucy felt the circle complete. The waitress who had reluctantly played piano that night at Bellini's had found her way home at last.